Urbanization during the Gilded Age was an increase in the amount of cities present in the U.S.
Formed the American West and gave us mythical cowboys and unfortunately not so mythical Indian reservations. Today, we leave the sticks and head for the cities, as so many Americans and immigrants have done throughout this nation's history. I mean, we may like to imagine that the history of America is all go west, young man, but in fact, from Mark Twain to pretty much every hipster in Brooklyn, it's the opposite. So population was growing everywhere in America after 1850. Following a major economic downturn in the 1890s, farm prices made a comeback, and that drew more and more people out west to take part in what would eventually be called agriculture's golden age. Although, to be fair, agriculture's real golden age was in like 3000 BCE, when Mesopotamians were like, dude, if we planted these in rows, we could have more of it than we could eat. So it was really more of a second golden age. But anyway, more than 1 million land claims were filed under the Homestead Act in the 1890s, and between 1900 and 1910, the populations of Texas and Oklahoma together increased by almost 2 million people. And another 800,000 people moved into Kansas, the Dakotas, and Nebraska. That's right, people moved to Nebraska. Sorry, I just hadn't yet offended Nebraskans. I'm looking to get through the list before the end of the year. But one of the central reasons that so many people moved out west was that the demand for agricultural products was increasing due to the growth of cities. In 1880, 20% of the American population lived in cities, and there were 12 cities with a population over 100,000 people. This rose to 18 cities in 1900, with the percentage of urban dwellers rising to 38%. And by 1920, 68% of Americans lived in cities, and 26 cities had a population over 100,000. So in the 40 years around the turn of the 20th century, America became the world's largest industrial power and went from being predominantly rural to largely urban. This is, to use a technical historian term, a really big deal, because it didn't just make cities possible, but also their products. It's no coincidence that while all this was happening, we were getting cool stuff like electric lights and moving picture cameras, neither of which were invented by Thomas Edison. I don't know if you've noticed, but suddenly there are a lot more photographs in Crash Course US History B-roll. So the city leading the way in this urban growth was New York, especially after Manhattan was consolidated with Brooklyn and the Bronx, Queens, and Staten Island in 1898. At the turn of the century, the population of the 23 square miles of Manhattan Island was over 2 million, and the combined 5 boroughs had a population over 4 million. But while New York gets most of the attention in this time period, and all time periods since, it wasn't alone in experiencing massive growth. Like my old hometown of Chicago, after basically burning to the ground in 1871, became the second largest city in America by the 1890s. Also, they reversed the flow of the freaking Chicago River, probably the second most impressive feat in Chicago at the time, the first being that the Cubs won 2 World Series. Even though I'm sorely tempted to chalk up the growth of these metropolises to a combination of better nutrition and a rise in scootily pooping, I'm gonna have to bow to stupid historical accuracy and tell you that much of the growth had to do with the phenomenon that this period is most known for: immigration. Of course, by the end of the 19th century, immigration was not a new phenomenon in the United States. After the first wave of colonization by English people and Spanish people and other Europeans, there was a new wave of Scandinavians, French people, and especially the Irish. Most of you probably know about the potato famine of the 1840s that led 1 million Irish men and women to flee. If you don't know about it, it was awful. And the second largest wave of immigrants was made up of German speakers, including a number.
Many people moved into cities. The country was shifting from being mainly agricultural to industrial.
Because many people moved into the cities, the population increased rapidly.
Inventors helped the Gilded Age progress because of their inventions.
Inventions such as Thomas Edison's light bulb became popular along with electricity.
Rockefeller contributed to the Gilded Age because of his work in the oil field.
Skyscrapers were first made of steel, and new inventions had to be made to get to the top of the building.
The elevator was an important invention, and we still use it today.
Machines helped to produce goods faster and of better quality, resulting in more people moving to the city.
Children were forced to work in factories because of the downturn in the economy.
Since they were small, they were forced to do dangerous tasks in the workforce.
For example, they were forced to crawl in spaces where adults could not fit, and were forced to fix machines when they were broken because of their small fingers.
They were only paid a fraction of the adult salary.
Children were often beat by their bosses, or even killed by machinery.
Women's jobs were just as dangerous as men's.
The pay for women was higher than it was for children, but lower than men's pay.
Dangerous machinery became hazards to workers, resulting in minor body parts being cut off.
They were forced to work long hours and didn't have time to spend with their family.
Poor working conditions led to the development of labor unions.
Labor unions fought for better pay, better working conditions, and shorter hours.
People began to immigrate from Europe in hopes of better job opportunities and economic gain.
New immigrants led to overpopulation.
Job opportunities began to fade.
As a result of a growing population, houses were made, called tenants.
Poor housing conditions passed diseases.
Many diseases were found in tenants because of the lack of sanitation from overcrowding.
Vermin such as rats added to the sanitation problem in the growing cities.
Many families were forced to live in one-room apartments.
Although many families were suffering, there was a low percentage of wealthy families.
Wealthy families had an advantage and looked down on the poor. The Gilded Age was a trying time for most, but the inventions still influence life today.